Welcome everyone to the ELL webinar. Thank you for signing up and being here with us. Today, the topic that we're going to focus on is grammar as choice for literacy development. And we're very pleased to have Professor Debra Myhill together with our very own Dr. Christine Xavier present their sharing with us today. So maybe before we start, I'll give a brief introduction of both our speakers. And Debra will present first, followed by Christine, and there'll be a Q&A session. So firstly, we'll have Professor Debra Myhill who will be sharing with us. She's Professor Emerita of Language and Literacy Education at the School of Education in the University of Exeter. She's well known for her work on grammar in the teaching and learning of writing, the role of talk in supporting metalinguistic understanding about writing, and composing processes in writing. Currently, she's working on 2 international research projects, one in Australia, investigating writing in different disciplines, and the second with colleagues in Norway and France, investigating how reading, English and French are taught in these 3 countries. After Debra shares, Christine will come on next. Dr. Christine Xavier is a lecturer at the English Language and Literature Department at NIE, where she teaches courses on grammar, sociolinguistics, and communications. Her research is focused on the intersections between pedagogical grammar and English language variation and use. She recently completed a planning grant, Grammar as Meaning-Making Resource for Literacy Development, with her co-principal investigator, Dr. Alexis Chia. Their book, which will be published by Routledge, will be out by the end of the year. So, if you want to find out more about her study and what she's learned from it, that's the book to look out for. So I think right now, without much ado, let me invite Debra to share to share.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'll just get this started. And there we go. I presume that's okay. It's all clear for everyone to see. Yep, thank you. Well, thank you very much to the Singapore team for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it is one of the wonders of technology that it allows us to do this. So I'm starting, and then Christine is going to follow through, drawing on some of her work, and I think you'll see the very close connections between what we're doing. But our work that we've been doing as a team here in Exeter has been very much looking at how the way we teach grammar can help students to understand better what it means to be a writer. And the fundamental focus around that is the idea of meaning making, the idea of grammar as social semiotic, not as grammar as about form and accuracy. And I want to just start this with just addressing that, what I call the trouble with grammar, because one of the big problems with grammar, of course, is it means different things to different people. And the minute I say the word grammar, different people are having different feelings and views about it. And actually, when we look at grammar and grammar research, there are 3 fundamental problems that surround the topic. One is, as I say, this attitude problems. There's a real tendency with grammar for it to become, particularly I would say in Anglophone countries, it's not necessarily the same in other countries, for it to become very biased and polemic discussion where people are either for grammar teaching or against grammar teaching. And in that context, it's very hard to move forward the proper academic and pedagogical discussion about grammar because people are too bounded by their own position. Then there are real methodological problems, and I could do a whole presentation just on this, and I'm not going to, but I just wanted to flag it because repeatedly there are meta-analyses which say grammar teaching doesn't improve writing. But when you actually look at the studies that form that, A, there are very few, B, that it's often based on very limited data. There's often no sense of a causal link between what's happening. Why would learning about nouns on a Tuesday help your writing of narrative on a Thursday? What's the causal link? There is also in the qualitative data, so all of the rest of that is quantitative data, a lot of cherry picking out of the data, the points that want to be made without showing the counter evidence. And of course, the other problem we've got with anything where you're looking at writing is there are real problems assessing writing. It is a very difficult thing to assess because of its multidimensionality multidimensionality. So, for example, if your major problem with writing is your ideas and ideation, the teaching them the grammar may not help that aspect of it. So one of the problems there is we need a more fine-grained way about thinking about writing assessment. But the other problem is theoretical, and I'm hoping to address a little bit of this in the presentation, that the word grammar is used, but there's limited theorization about what it means, limited theorization, excuse me, of that link between, what is that relationship between grammar and writing from the point of view of learning? Which grammar are we talking about? And that could be different theoretical grammars. Typically in the debate, there's a confusion over talking about traditional grammar without defining what traditional grammar means, and traditional grammar teaching, which tends to mean is talking about the way that it's taught, not what is taught. So you can see that it's an area that is fraught with problems. So if we think about this question, then, well, why teach grammar? Well, I think there are three principal reasons why we might want to teach grammar. One of them is simply the knowledge of the language for its own sake. You know, we know the structure of their own and other languages that we might learning. You might be teaching grammar because you want to help to improve the accuracy of students' writing. And you might be teaching grammar to develop knowledge about how language works. Now, our research has focused very much on the latter one, but actually there are really good arguments why both of the others also have a place, and why at certain points you might well want to be looking at grammar for those reasons. So I adopt a much more plural view of why you might teach grammar. However, what I don't believe is that random grammar teaching improves errors. I think if you're going to look at error and accuracy, you've got to target the kind of problems that students are facing in their own writing. And then this other important distinction that links to what we're teaching is this distinction between the prescriptive and the descriptive grammar. Are we teaching the rules of a language, or are we teaching how language is used in practice? And in general, our research has focused on the latter. And likewise, this distinction between looking at grammar forms or looking at how grammar works in context. And again, in general, our work has focused on the latter, the function-focused grammar. So if we think about this grammar debate, and one of my arguments is that the grammar debate hasn't really taken us very far forward. And I think what we've tried to do is try to disrupt that grammar debate a bit and move it on. Sometimes when you're looking at research articles, there's too strong a desire really just to prove something, prove that grammar works or prove that it doesn't work. And certainly, again, from our own point of view, we've been really keen to highlight both where things have been successful in our approaches, but also where there might have been problems or tensions, because we have to have that kind of critical, open-minded inquiry about grammar. And we have also adopted very different methodological stances in our own research, so we're not trapped in one way of looking. And you can see there we've gone right from the sort of, the gold standard randomized controlled trial right through to observations and classroom analysis. We are informed by theories, and I'm going to talk a little bit more theory in a moment, which see grammar as meaningful to the act of decision-making as a writer. I think that is core to what we're talking about. That notion of thinking about grammar has to be meaningful to the thinking that you're engaging in as a writer about your text. And we have done a cumulative set of studies over about 18 to 20 years now, where we've been looking at the problems, looking at the issues, looking at the successes and building on it. And what we've been really interested in was trying to understand how teachers are using the approaches we've been looking at, what's actually happening in classroom practice, what's the nature of student learning, and not to prove that we're right. That's not our goal. We want to understand the classroom better. So I just got a little example here that kind of exemplifies in one slide what we're really thinking about. I'm not going to ask you to do the task because we're far too big a group, but I will just give you a little bit of space to mentally think about my questions, because one of the things we do is use a lot of getting young writers and teachers to think about the choices that authors make in their text. And this comes from a unit of work for upper primary, where they're reading a book by the man Michael Morpurgo, who was our Children's Laureate. And it's a retelling of Arthurian legend. And this sentence comes in the middle of the story, a key plot moment. It's a moment when Arthur is about to be given his famous sword, Excalibur. I don't know if you know the story, but it's a very famous magical sword. And this is the moment where he's given it. So it's a key plot moment. And what we ask the children to do in groups is to read the sentence aloud. And you'll notice I haven't read it aloud deliberately, because I don't want to shape how you read it by the way that I say it. And asking it, well, where will you put the emphasis? And then we get them playing around with reordering the sentence without taking any words out or putting any words in, just moving things around. And we often talk about moving the chunks around, because it isn't actually words necessarily, it's the chunks. And then get them to think again about, well, how does this change the emphasis? And then we give them this sentence, which is the same. Again, this is one of those possible reorderings. And we get them again in groups to read those sentences aloud, and the power of hearing text aloud, and get them discussing, well, how do they portray this moment in the plot differently? One way we get them doing that is by getting them to imagine that they're a filmmaker and they've been given that sentence as part of the script, the screenplay, and get them to think about, well, if you had those two sentences, how would you film each of them? And is it different? And they have their discussion and we take feedback. And then we move through more to I haven't mentioned grammar yet, you'll notice. We look at the grammar and explicitly discuss what's the effect of moving that adverbial out of the mists to different places in the sentence. So in the first one, it's at the front, and in the second one, it's in the middle. And of course, it could have been at the end. And then also we look at the subject-verb reversal, which of course in English is unusual. The subject nearly always comes before the verb. So what do you think is the effect of putting that subject after the verb, and get them discussing that? And in general, what comes out of this is a recognition that in the first one, there is more of a creation of suspense or tension or drama, because what you see first are the mists, the swirling mists, and then only after that does the sentence begin to focus in on what you're seeing. And even that inversion, you see that something's coming before you really see what it is. It's not a figure came a figure. In the other one, the emphasis is on the figure. The figure coming out of the mists. And when they talk about it as a screenshot, most people talk about the first one as being a very wide-angled lens with lots of swirling mists that then homes in on the figure, whereas the second sentence starts with the figure in sharp focus and then the mists behind. And so we begin to see that sense that actually the grammatical, here they're syntactical choices that you make as a writer can alter, or at least try to alter, how a reader might receive that sentence. And the fundamental lesson here is not that one sentence is better than the other, but they're performing different functions. They're doing different things for that moment in the narrative. Presumably Morpurgo was much more interested in this idea of tension and suspense than the second version, which is more interested in the figure. So that sums up in a way what we're doing. And because the word grammar always seems to be the exact antithesis to creativity, I often like to use what writers say, because writers often say exactly what we're trying to say. We talk a lot about the craft of writing, and these are two comments from Maya Angelou in interviews that she did, where she talks about the craft of writing in terms of understanding what language can do, gaining control of the language, and recognizing that actually those choices you make can either make people weep, laugh, or even go to war. And more specifically, talking about the grammar, she talks about how you can take nouns, pronouns, verbs, and adverbs, ball them together and make them bounce. I love that. In a way that will make people, in one way, have a romantic mood, or in another way, a bellicose mood. So it just sums up that this is what the way writers do think, or some writers do think. So I said I'd touch in on the theoretical perspectives. And fundamentally, theoretically, the language view we adopt, which you might already have guessed from what I've already said, draws on Halliday and his functional view of language, and language as social semiotic. And he talks about grammar as a meaning-making resource. We're trying to encourage teachers to enable children as writers to see that grammar is a resource for helping them shape their texts. And Halliday talked about it being semantic-y, it focused on meaning rather than form. He emphasized the importance of context. So that sentence we just looked at was in the context of a key moment in a plot. That sentence might have had a different shape and meaning had it been in a different textual context or even a different social context. And it is, as I say, a meaning-oriented theorization. And it's looking about that integral relationship between form and meaning, but the emphasis is on what, the function of a linguistic structure, not what it is. What's it doing, not what it is. From that, now we don't use systemic functional linguistics terminology, even though we're using that theoretical framing, because our own national curriculum specifies the terms that have to be used, and we have to be consistent with that. But grammar as choice comes through from different disciplinary perspectives. So obviously it's there in Halliday, what the properties of text, its meaning and its choice. But cognitive psychologist Kellogg, who's thinking about what happens in our minds when we write, talks about all writers must make decisions about their text. Not all of those are grammatical decisions. A lot of them are other decisions, but grammatical decisions are part of it. Carter and McCarthy, who are English linguists, talk about thinking about grammar in two ways. Grammar as choice, which is what we're talking about, how we make choices, meaning makers, as well as the grammar of structure, which describes how language is constructed. And Adam Lefstein talks about how teaching should be looking at I was going ahead without me. How teaching should be able to help pupils make choices from their linguistic resources and be aware of the effects of those choices on the power of their writing. So what we're interested in is how we help writers to understand that language choices are not arbitrary. They are central to how they communicate their ideas. And then the other theoretical perspective that we look at that integrates totally with that Hallidayan view of language is metalinguistic understanding, which theoretically draws both from linguistics and from psychology. And here are some of those definitions of metalinguistic understanding. But in a nutshell, it's really about how we can, instead of just simply being users of language, we can step back from it and reflect on, think about the language we're using, and then make decisions as a consequence of that reflection. Gomber, that third quote, draws that out a lot, that it's about reflection, then it's also about monitoring action so that you do something with it. So metalinguistic understanding in the context of writing, because obviously metalinguistic understanding is looked at across all language use, is about being explicitly aware of how language is used. Now, obviously, all language users have a significant body of implicit knowledge of language and grammar. We're trying to draw that out explicitly because then it can be used. It's about that reflecting and thinking. It's looking at and understanding how language works in written text. And fundamentally, it's about why. Why did that writer choose that? Why are you choosing that as a writer, rather than noting what grammatical structure is used? So we're not interested so much in are they using a present tense, but why are they using a present tense, for example. So drawing that together, those two theoretical underpinnings of everything we've done are that functional view of grammar drawing on Halliday and metalinguistic understanding, because it links to that idea of decision making. So I want to introduce now the pedagogy that we use in practical terms. You've had the kind of theory, but very quickly the practical terms. And over these studies, we've developed these pedagogical principles which have evolved. These aren't the same as they once were. Fundamentally, at that L, making that link between the grammar you're introducing and how it works in the writing. And it's the writing which should lead the grammar. So if you're looking at, persuasive argument, what is it that your learners need to learn about persuasive writing, where grammar might help them understand it better? We look at grammar through examples, not lengthy explanations. So you saw in the example earlier that I'd highlighted in colour the grammatical structures that we were focusing on, because we found when we were watching lessons that teachers kept deviating into mini grammar lessons when we really wanted the focus to be on writing. authentic text, so we're really looking at the real choices that real writers make, and the discussion. And the discussion is absolutely fundamentally critical. We've discovered that you can do the other three, but if you don't do the discussion, you don't cement the learning. And that example that we looked at earlier on of the lead principle of the Arthur story, and I talked it through, here you can see the lead principles, actually how they played out in that example. So Arthur is an authentic text. There's discussion in that first activity, and important to note, it's discussion without metalanguage. So you can have metalinguistic discussion about texts and words and chunks without using grammatical or otherwise metalanguage. And then there's more discussion with metalanguage at the end. A link is made between the grammar and meaning, because we're looking at what's the effect of moving the adverbial, and grammatical examples are presented both by naming them, the adverbial, the subject, the verb, but also by showing it in green so that they can see it without deviating. And I'm just going to walk you through another quick example, just so you see that the range of ways that you could look at this. So this comes from children's author Roald Dahl and the BFG, the Big Friendly Giant. And in this story, if you don't know, it's Sophie and the giant have become friends, and there are lots of nasty giants who are trying to eat all the children. And Sophie's decided that if she goes to see the Queen, perhaps the Queen can help them out. So again, this is a key moment in the plot when the Queen and the maid see the BFG for the first time. And you might just look at that and think, well, okay, what language choices might you draw attention to in this extract? And how would you express the connection between the grammatical choice and the effect it achieves? So there, that how would you express is pushing on the idea of verbalization. So you could just look at that first sentence, then out he came. It's short, it's a single clause sentence, and the adverb out is in a non-standard position. In everyday speech, we'd say then he came out. What's the effect of moving the out earlier? So it emphasizes that fact that he is coming out. The short sentence is really focusing our attention on this moment of, again, of drama. Out he came. And it's an action which leads to revelation, because after he comes out, he's revealed for what he's like as a great giant. Or you could look at the adverbials. There are 3 adverbials in succession at the front before the main clause. What do? Well, they're foregrounding what he looks like. At this moment, we're not interested in action. It's just that visual effect after he's come out. What do they see? And they see his height, they see what he's wearing, they see what he's carrying. So that's that moment of revelation. And then we see how he's walking magnificently. So even that is telling us something. And then you've got these repeated sentence structures at the end. 3-word sentences, identical structure, changed verbs and changed subjects. And what they do is they encourage the comparison of the different reactions of the 3 characters, supported by those 3 different verbs. It really stresses it. The maid screamed, the Queen gasped, Sophie waved, because of course she knows him already. So you get the reaction to the revelation. So just in one few lines of text, there's such a lot that you can discuss, and these were all discussed at upper primary level, around how we shape what we want to say affects how readers might understand it. It's not just the word choices that we make or the ideas that we're expressing, but how we do it. So if I just pull this together now, really what we're talking about is this idea of grammar as choice for meaning making. And again, those examples from the BFG, we're not interested in encouraging children to say, I used a fronted adverbial. We're more interested in encouraging children to think about why use a fronted adverbial here, what alternatives could you have done, and getting that elaborated explanation. So I used a fronted adverbial does show metalinguistic understanding. What we're really interested in is that metalinguistic understanding which brings in the understanding of effect. I used a fronted adverbial here to draw attention to the carefulness of the BFG's action. And if you wanted to see that modelled as a kind of theoretical diagram, our argument is that the pedagogy is addressing these 3 things: explicit teacher input on choices and effects, a focus on function, not form, and language and context, and opportunities for dialogic metalinguistic talk about text, including their own writing. And that then leads to this metalinguistic understanding, which through our research shows it does lead to improved outcomes for writing. And we see this as circular rather than linear. These circles go round and round. And that's it, I think. Oh, I've got, and it's linked to metacognition and self-regulation. So thank you very much. I'll stop there so that I can pass over to Christine.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I've never thought grammar could be inspiring until today. So thank you so much. And now I'm just going to pass it over to Christine, who is going to inspire us with more examples of grammar. So Christine, please.
All right, thank you very much, Deborah. What I'll do now is I'll try to contextualize the teaching of grammar as choice in the Singapore context, right? So I'll share two local Singapore case studies as illustrations of teaching grammar as choice in EL literacy classes. So I hope you get to see some of what Deborah was sharing earlier through these case studies. So when we look at grammar instruction in Singapore classrooms, the Singapore English language syllabus actually advocates for a balanced approach to grammar teaching. That is, teaching grammar both explicitly and in the context of language use. However, local research studies and anecdotal evidence actually suggest that there is room for innovation and alignment with syllabus guidelines in the Singapore EL classrooms to move away from traditional methods where grammar and literacy skills are taught in silos or separately. So this prompted us to actually embark on an action research project. So the two case studies I will be sharing are the result of an action research project that Chini shared earlier, for which I was the principal investigator, and Alexis Chia, Dr. Alexis Chia was the co-principal investigator. He's here in the audience. And also 10 teacher participants, 4 from a primary school and 6 from 3 secondary schools. And some of them are here today as well. So the main objective of this project was really to reconceptualize grammar in the EL classroom, to move away from a static portrayal of grammar towards one that is dynamic, focusing on grammatical choices for meaning construction. So our aims were to investigate how teachers in Singapore schools can teach grammar as a meaning-making resource for literacy development and the benefits of such a teaching process for both teachers and students. So let me very briefly share how we carried out this project. It adopted a qualitative approach focusing on intervention in real classroom settings. Our approach was underpinned by Timperley and colleagues' framework for teacher inquiry and knowledge building to promote better student learning. So if you look at the framework here presented, we start from the right-hand corner. The participating teachers started off by identifying their learners' needs, their specific literacy requirements, so as to enable targeted intervention. The teachers then identified their own learning needs, their own professional needs to effectively engage in these classroom interventions. So they identified gaps in their grammar content knowledge and pedagogical content knowledge. The project investigators, Alex and myself, who are also teacher educators, then conducted targeted professional development sessions covering essential grammar and pedagogical content to equip and support these teachers to integrate grammar instruction into their literacy lessons. So in collaboration and consultation with us, the teacher educators, the teachers redesigned specific units or lessons in terms of lesson plans and teaching materials, focusing on literacy development, integrating the teaching of grammar as meaning-making resource. They then went on to enact these lessons. They taught the revised units, putting into practice the integrated approach to grammar instruction. Post-lesson interviews were then conducted with the teachers to gather insights into their experience of contextualized of a contextualized approach to teaching grammar and their perceived impact on enhancing students' literacy skills development. So I will now go on to share two case studies from the Action Research Project, one in a primary school and one in a secondary school. So I'm being a bit ambitious trying to cover these two case studies, so I'm going to kind of speed through a little bit. So I hope you just follow through. So this case study focused on adverbials. The target group was 12-year-old students from a P6 English Language Foundation class, which comprised students with lower progress needing more time and support. The larger objective of the lesson was actually to develop writing skills. So why adverbials? Why did the teacher choose to focus on adverbials? She shared that it was really to help students elaborate on their ideas, specifically time, place, manner, reason. And she said, when it comes to marking, I find myself asking a lot of WH questions. Why did this happen? When did this happen? And so on. I feel there can be elaboration of writing if students know how to capitalize on the use of verbs. So she wanted to help students to pattern content. So the other objective for her was really to provide scaffolding and support so that writing is less daunting for this group of students. And she wanted to also help them to self-monitor their writing. She said if they are aware of how they can elaborate, then I think they can monitor their writing. So the lessons actually flowed from listening to reading to writing activities. She started off, let's call her teacher A. She started off with a tuning in activity to raise awareness, right? So to capture students' attention and to raise awareness, she read aloud two texts, one without adverbials, that would be your text 1 on screen, and one with adverbials highlighted in text 2. So, so please take a look as I'm sharing, all right? Take a look at the text. So the teacher chose to use an authentic Singaporean text, The Duck Thief, which is actually a short story set in 1940 Singapore written by Chia Ah Hang. The text was chosen, there was a reason this text was chosen, because it aligned with the value of responsibility, which was the focus of the school's character education for that term. So teacher A then engaged the students in a discussion where the students were asked which text they preferred and why. Interestingly, the students found that the text that was longer more interesting and easier to understand, and the shorter one, they actually said it was boring. Next, the teacher introduced the concept of adverbials, and she used this metaphor of a stretchable rubber band to explain how sentences in the second text had been stretched, expanded. So she said that I showed them a rubber band and told them that we are learning to stretch, how to stretch a sentence like a rubber band. So essentially, the aim was to teach students how to stretch a sentence to elaborate on the verbs, the when, where, why, and how of the verb. She actually deliberately avoided using the term adverbials, as she felt that this term might be a little bit too challenging for this group of students. Then she went on to the process of guiding discovery and facilitating assessment for learning. She went on to the next activity where she had the students work in pairs to compare the two texts earlier, text 1 and text 2, side by side. So she initially modeled the noticing to highlight the additional details in the second text, asking questions like, what do the additional details tell us? The students then annotated the rest of the text, noting what the additional information told them. The teacher then guided them to connect this information to the verbs. So she specifically asked the students, she asked them where he had the duck horn, where he sat, or when he sat, or why he liked the ducks. So this is the point when the verbs became more visible to the students. They were invited to share their responses to the questions. And through this hands-on exploratory activity, the students came to realize that the additional information was in fact answering the when, where, why, and how questions of the verbs. Teacher A then moved on to explicit teaching and enabling application. So she revisited the text, text 2 with the adverbials, and she engaged in explicit teaching, visually making the links between the verbs and the adverbials for the students, as you can see on screen here. To reinforce learning, she continued with the rest of the text because the students were quite interested to know what happened further down in the text, to help students see the writer's intentional use of adverbials for increased effect and impact. So for example, how he yelled, if you look at the first verb, or when he yelled, really to paint a clearer picture of what was taking place. She then moved on to activity 3, which was application of learning done in pairs. So what she did was she went on with the mentor text or the model text and asked the students to stretch the sentences. She actually called this brightening up the text, right? So she gave them another part and got them to expand on the verbs. And she got them to share their stretched sentences. At the end of these lessons, she asked questions like, why did the writer add the details? Or how did the writer stretch the sentences? They wrote down their thoughts, their key takeaways, and they discussed the answers as a class. So some of the answers were, oh, because the author wants others to understand the story better and make the story interesting, or because the author wants to grab the reader's attention. So overall, the students actually gained a deeper understanding of this role of adverbials to enhance writing, even though they were not introduced explicitly to the meta-language adverbials. She then did have a follow-up activity, which was an individual writing task. So this was quite interesting. She showed a video on an irresponsible act. She was following through with the value of responsibility from the model text earlier and used it as a basis for a writing activity. She presented some of the video shots as a series of composition pictures and provided the students with only simple sentences. Students then added information to the simple sentences. The teacher did underline the verbs to kind of scaffold for them, to guide them on how to add additional information. But what I really liked was when she shared that she said to the students for this particular activity, she said, she told the students rather that it was their choice whether to add additional information or not. She said, I like them to know that this is also my way of showing respect to them as authors, creating this awareness of authorial choices or the choices that they have, the linguistic choices they have as authors. The students were then asked to, again, encouraged to share their improved stories. Post-teaching, based on the teacher's observation and assessment, her students were able to understand the concept of adverbials without the meta-language adverbials. And students are now, she says, more willing to brighten up their writing using adverbials, and even quite doable for weaker writers. Let me now move on to case study 2. So for case study 2, the target group consisted of secondary 1 students who were high progress learners. The larger objective of this lesson was to write an effective biography. Teacher B, let's call him Teacher B, right? He shared that he chose to focus on word class to heighten students' awareness of word choices in character development for effective biographical writing. It's important to note at this point, though, that the students had some prior knowledge of word classes in terms of meaning, form, and function, though this lesson on word classes may have previously been taught in quite decontextualized ways. This lesson flowed from reading to writing activities. For the reading activity, the teacher used an excerpt from an authentic biographical text as a model for character description. So the excerpt that he used was from this book called titled Adrift: My Childhood in Colonial Singapore by David T.K. Wong, which really the excerpt focused on the author's grandparents. And for this reading activity, what was done was that some words in the text were purposefully replaced with nonsensical words, as you can see here. So I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds to take a look at this. So you get the idea. So students were asked to identify the word classes of the nonsense words, drawing on their knowledge of the form and function of word classes, because you have to throw out meaning, right? And to replace these nonsense words with possible known words. So for example, if you look at the highlighted word millously here, in terms of form, drawing from their knowledge, the nonsense word takes on the suffix ly, typical of other adverbs. And in terms of function, it occurs after the verb deferred, a common position of adverbs. So based on the context of the text, then, a possible adverb that can take the place of millously could be something like respectfully. So this provided an opportunity for students to apply their knowledge of word classes in a contextualized and practical manner, allowing them to link this concept of word class to meaning creation. Teacher B then shared that the students were very engaged in this task because they felt challenged to identify the word classes of these nonsense words in context. They could not rely on Google or their memory, right? So Teacher B then got students to reflect on the following question. How has knowing the forms and functions of various word classes helped us with comprehending a text, even if this text contains unfamiliar words? So the students' responses included understanding the form and function of word classes supports them in deciphering the meaning of unfamiliar words, supports understanding of a piece of text, and actually strengthens their reading comprehension skills. The teacher then moved on to a writing activity. They were tasked to write a biographical text. So the students actually had a choice between two writing tasks, but one of which is the following. This really is some interview notes that the students were presented on Aye being the author's grandfather. And so this was adapted from the text Adrift. So the students were given these interview notes, as you can see. And students, based on the interview notes, they then took on the role of a biographer and wrote a paragraph or two on the author's grandfather. So they actually drew from the reading activity their heightened awareness of the use of words belonging to different word classes to express meaning and to describe characters. It actually came into play here. And once they were done with the writing task, they were asked to reflect. In this reflection, they had to do a couple of things. They had to pick 3 words that made Wong's grandfather interesting to the reader. They had to identify the word classes of these words and explain how these made Wong's grandfather more interesting. They were also encouraged to think about how using another word from another word class would have made Wong's grandfather less interesting. I mean, let's bear in mind that these are high progress students, so they were challenged to do these things. In addition, they were also encouraged to reflect on how having this increased awareness of different word classes has actually helped them to make choices in their writing to achieve their purpose. So this activity prompted the students to make the link between form and meaning, focusing on how language choices actually create different effects, mindful that the word choices they make must be purposeful. And in this way, the activity actually facilitated the development of authors with agency, something Debra mentioned earlier. So in reviewing students' written pieces, Teacher B noted a shift in the storytelling style. He said that many of his students transitioned from telling to showing. So he said that they were more active in using adjectives, adverbs, and all of that. Let me now move on very quickly to talking about the benefits of this contextualized approach to grammar teaching. So some of the benefits I'm going to highlight are summaries of what a summary of actually what I've shared. So here are some of the perceived benefits to students and teachers, and I'll elaborate on these in the next few slides. So when we talk about perceived benefits because we did not actually interview the students, right? It's gathered from the teachers' observations. So in terms of this, the teachers noted that there was enhanced understanding of the role of grammar. They said students gained insights into the practical applications of grammar, and they could see the interconnectedness of grammar and other language skills like reading and writing. So they viewed grammar as a tool for enhancing meaning. So teacher B said they now have an increased awareness of how to use grammar for reading and writing, making grammar more purposeful and relevant to their language use. Both teachers noted how this approach to teaching grammar enhanced students' reading comprehension. Teacher A noted how they were more aware of the role of adverbials in enhancing how a reader comprehends a text, especially through the listening activity they did. And teacher B noted how students were more aware of the different word choices that they had. Both teachers also noted significant improvements in students' writing, particularly in their ability to write more descriptively, because that was really the lesson objectives. By having greater awareness of and understanding of how grammatical choices affect meaning, the students were able to craft more vivid and engaging texts, making their writing more effective and impactful. They noted how students' writing shifted to more showing than telling. So this improvement in writing skills does show a clear demonstration of how grammar knowledge can be practically applied to enhance communication. They also observed higher levels of student engagement. So they noted that this element of discovery involved in analyzing real authentic text seemed to capture students' interest more effectively than traditional grammar exercises. Teacher A noted that this approach to teaching grammar actually brought about greater ownership in students' learning. And the teachers were also of the view that this increased engagement is likely to lead to better retention of concepts and more positive attitudes towards grammar learning, suggesting that this contextualized approach to grammar offers a possible framework for continued growth in language development. Let's now talk about the benefits to teachers. So both teachers shared that participating in this project and in taking a contextualized approach to teaching grammar increased their confidence and competence as EL teachers, leading to professional growth. They both developed a deeper understanding of grammatical concepts and how they function in real language use. And teacher A said that in teaching adverbials in this way, using an authentic text, the process actually not just taught students how to stretch sentences, but also stretch her as a language teacher, right? And teacher B said that this approach makes him a more confident and competent teacher. So this increased competence allowed the teachers to address students' questions more effectively and to explain concepts with greater clarity, leading to more effective teaching and overall a greater sense of professional fulfillment. Both teachers also noted that this approach led to more substantive classroom discussions about language, moving away from the traditional right or wrong paradigm. Teacher A said that it provides opportunity for students to ask questions. Why? Debra mentioned the importance of the why. Why are we doing this? This is a very important question. Teacher A said that students need to see meaning in what they're learning before they're willing to invest time to delve deeper. So instead of this passive acceptance of rules, students were encouraged to ask questions, offer suggestions, and think critically about language use. And this actually enriched classroom dialogue. So this shift towards active inquiry not only deepens students' understanding, but also creates a more engaging classroom environment, allowing teachers to gain insights into student thinking, because discussions is where students voice out their thinking aloud. And teachers were then able to tailor their instructions more effectively. And the last point, the teachers also found that this approach enabled them to give more detailed and constructive feedback on student writing instead of vague suggestions. So she said, teacher A said that when she was marking, she wrote down when, where, why, how at the side of the picture compositions to help her monitor and to show the students which of the adverbials they were actually using. Teacher B shared that he could give more precise suggestions, like before a noun, you can add adjectives, etc. So this specific feedback rooted in grammatical understanding actually helps students see exactly how they could improve their writing. So this more detailed and concept-specific feedback can lead to more effective student learning and improvement in writing skills because it helps to bridge the gap between theoretical grammar knowledge and practical writing skills. So in conclusion, I think the benefits that I've shared through this, through the teacher voices, actually highlight how teaching as grammar as choice, making it a meaning-making resource, can create a more enriching and effective learning environment, benefiting and empowering both teachers and students in multiple ways. So it does transform grammar from a dry rule-based subject into a more dynamic tool for understanding and creating meaning in language. So thank you so much. I'll pass the time over to Chin-Yi now.
Thank you so much for attending this event. The ELL webinar is something we hope to have maybe every 3 months. So look out for the next one and do sign up to be on our mailing list if you are not already there to be kept informed. So thank you everyone and have a good Tuesday.